Visión de los fondos en Cretec.
One fun fact, I think I'll offer an interesting fact. I know that's not what I'm supposed to do. One fun data point there for you all. It takes, on average, over 80 days for a subcontractor to get paid after they've had to pay for their labor and materials. So there's a big time lag, and I think that's one of the reasons why construction is challenging, difficult, and there's some interesting pain points to solve.
What about all the languages you speak?
I'm Shelby Kumar. I'm a partner with Third Sphere. We're an early stage venture platform. We also have a credit fund that we've launched. We've done over 100 investments over the last 10 years, so have a little bit of a track record in understanding what it takes to actually scale up startups and decarbonize both buildings and old industrial sectors. My background has been in managing all of the different stakeholders involved in getting a pilot into a long-term contract and master services agreement. So spend a lot of time working with our founders and our platform approach to supporting them. I think my investments lately have been mostly in looking around the systems change required for climate tech, but mostly with, on the assumption that there is a stakeholder involved who doesn't care at all. And so looking at what are all the ways from a business case and impact and efficiency perspective can actually change a lot of the ways these industries work. Okay, my fun fact is that I've never lived in New York, but I have lived in Iceland, in Las Vegas, and in Lagos, Nigeria.
Wow. Hi everyone, I'm Faisal. I'm the managing partner at Fly Labs. We're a London-based VC. We invest in European companies going global. We made around 80 investments in over 15 countries across 4 funds, and we're looking forward to sharing our insights with you guys today. My fun fact is not about me, but it's something I read recently. So according to a former Google employee, AI, artificial intelligence, is going to be about 1 million times smarter than the average human by the year 2030, which is just 7 years away. And just to put that in perspective, that's the difference in IQ between Albert Einstein and the common housewife.
Is that a fun fact, or is that supposed to scare us?
We should all be about optimism and hate.
All venture capitalists we have.
Jeffrey Berman, I'm the general partner with Camber Creek. We were the first institutional venture capital platform focused on investing in innovation in the built world. Our informal founding was back in 2008, formally in 2011. We call ourselves hyper snipers. We see pretty much every deal out there, but we invest in very few. We pioneered the idea that strategic investors are the driver and the accelerant of growth. We've done less than 4 dozen deals since 2011, and we focus on all the major food groups within real estate industry, as well as we were talking about this earlier: prop tech, non-tech, retail tech, fintech, etc. Fun fact about me: I am a helicopter pilot. But soon, I guess AI will fly as well, so I'll be
And before we get into the meat of the panel, we want to get to know you guys a little bit better, just as we think about example stories and all of that. And so can I first just have a raise of hands, like who in the room is an investor? Okay, great. Who in the room is a asset holder, property manager, property owner, developer? Okay, not as many. And who in the room is a startup? Awesome. Okay, so a lot of investors, a lot of startups, a couple asset holders. So one of the things I think everyone heard, the backgrounds of everyone on this panel are actually pretty distinct and different. And so one of the things that we want to start with is what each of you are seeing as the top 2 to 3 pain points in the industry right now, and how that's influencing your thesis and what you're looking for as a result. And maybe we'll just start going this direction.
Maybe I'll focus more on construction because there's lots of news here. Construction, the two variables we focus on are costs, which are also what the real estate clients are interested in, but also around risk and risk mitigation as well, and transparency, basically, and in particular, when we think about different stakeholders on a particular job site. A real estate client, you have material suppliers, you have banks and insurance companies, and regulatory bodies, right? Permits, building codes, and so forth. And then lots of subcontractors, architects, engineers, and so forth. So we think a lot about the interface between these different stakeholders and how risk and data can be better managed to offer different types of solutions. For example, fintech solutions, IoT-based solutions that can analyze information like water leak events and do auto shut-off of a water leak, for example, on a job site, and have insurance subsidize and support that, for example. So risk mitigation and stakeholder alignment are some basic efficient processes.
Sure. I'd say on the building side, one of the things I'm seeing is there's so many different ways to start thinking about emissions reduction. And, in New York, there's Local Law 97, there's a lot of momentum with policy. I think that, internationally, and there's each of these building types that were built in a different era have different interventions and technologies that are best suited for the infrastructure and the norms of that moment and that type of architecture. And so I'd say, as a company who's building technology, finding your segment and trying to orient to who your pipeline of best adoption is going to look like and how repeatable that is going to be. And then as the portfolios of buildings, I think both new projects and folks who are holding on to a lot of existing assets, including government stakeholders, knowing where your best investment is going to translate to emissions reduction, people finding each other in that maze feels harder and harder. So I think Cretech is trying to answer that. So I think that's one. I'll say the second one is just the way the market fluctuations have happened over the last, let's call it 18 to 24 months, have really affected so many people in terms of what their liquidity looks like, what their investment looks like, what the priorities coming down from C-suite and public shareholders looks like. And so that shifting, like if we meet our milestones, we still don't get the thing that you said we were going to get, is really hard. It's really hard to do strategic planning and convert some of the potential pilot opportunities into long-term opportunities when even if you hit the tangible outcomes you're supposed to hit, there isn't the money on the table, right? Or there isn't the money waiting for that. And so I think that's been challenging across the board.
And love your point on different asset types, and we're really going to get into that in the next question too, related to different.
For us, we recognize that decarbonization as a whole is the largest challenge the industry is facing, particularly with both existing and oncoming legislations becoming an increasingly complex problem. And the way we look at it, kind of bucket it into three different buckets. There's the decarbonization of existing buildings, so like operational carbon, reducing that side. But there's also increasingly focused on the materials, which is the embodied carbon, how to use tech to help the real estate developers reduce their embodied carbon. And then there's legislation coming in Europe, at least around Scope 3 as well, which is the carbon emissions of your supply chain. So when you look at that as a whole, it just creates a pretty complex problem to solve for. There's a lot of tech that we're looking at and investing in that can help the owners and operators and developers solve for those problems.
So I agree with everything that was said, and I'll distill it into one major theme, which is money. Our owner-operators are focused on bottom line. Quite a few of them are going to be looking at a liquidity crunch with debt turning over, in addition to facing regulations that are coming down the pipe saying, hey, by the way, you've been making X amount of dollars doing business, why wait and see outcome? Well, that's going to shift when we add regulations and say, let's just decarbonizing our industry, which is necessary. And so for us, we're focused, the bottoms-up part of our strategy is, we know what the pain point is. The pain point is, how are these real estate entities going to be continually viable money-making concerns, and what companies, technologies, solutions, and products can we add to that to mitigate the challenges that they're going to be facing? And again, it all comes down to money.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's something that we've been talking about for anyone who's based in New York here. I think with Local Law 97 that was brought up before, we've been talking a lot about it within the city and almost reframing it and looking for ways for it to make money for people, and what are the ways that the city can create incentives, support, other elements, rather than just talking about it as a new decarbonization aspect, because ultimately these things need to be sustainable, for sure. And Jeff, I'm going to start back at you with the next question. You and Wanli and I were having a really interesting conversation in preparation for this, where we were talking a lot about the deployment challenges right now. Initial B's point, there's a ton of different assets in buildings, right? Whether it be as broad of categories as residential, commercial, different types of energy systems, different fragmentation that's available in the market. And so I was wondering if you could start by talking a little bit about where you've seen successful deployments taking place, an example of that, and where you've seen it go wrong and why.
Sure. So I think it might be helpful to describe our investment thesis, because if you think about a firm that's been active in some way for about 15 years and only making what's called 46 some odd investments, that's not a whole lot of investments. So we separate the companies that, actually let me take a little bit of a step back. We ask ourselves and the potential startup two questions. First is, can we use this product, software, service within our portfolio matrix? We define that as the buildings that we and our LPs own, the tenants, residents, and guests who work, live, and stay in those buildings, and the vendors who serve all three. So as of our fourth fund, which we're deploying out of currently, we have billions and billions of square feet of real estate represented, which, adding all those up permutationally, is millions of relationships that can be leveraged for the benefit of both our portfolio companies and our limited partners. Then we ask the second question, and as a fiduciary, this is the far more important question in my opinion, which is there an opportunity to drive a venture return? Most of the companies in our space, unfortunately, are not set up to actually drive a venture return. That's actually normal when you think about the power law of venture distribution. So we're only investing in the companies where we believe, A, yes, this is utilizable within that portfolio matrix. B, we stand a good chance and a high conviction of making a venture return. So when you put those two things together, you get a small minority of the companies that we're seeing that are actually viable. But quite a number of these companies that we don't invest in, which is the vast majority, they are still potentially good companies. So they stay in our ecosystem. And so I'll give you one example. We had an LP that relatively large company out of Michigan that was looking for certificate of insurance vendor management software. This is something that is hyper niche. You can't get, you're not talking about something. Is
anyone working on a startup in that space here? Oh, okay. So that.
Right. So we helped them find a number of companies that were apropos for this problem we were having. But then we canvassed a number of our other LPs, and at that time, none of them were really interested. They said, our current manual process is fine. 2 years later, that changed drastically. We started getting a ton of inbound from people saying, we have to manage this process better. We had already had a market map, so we reached back out to a number of these companies, discerned which was going to be that had the best chance of A, satisfying the requirements of our strategic limited partners, and B, driving a venture return. We made an investment. It's one of our stickiest companies in our entire portfolio. So that's like when you talk about tricky deployments, it was difficult to get early buy-in, but then once the industry started coming around to, oh, this is something that we can actually utilize and utilize favorably, it made it a heck of a lot easier. I imagine that's very similar to what you said.
Yeah, I'll maybe give an example on the construction side. So let me kind of describe three concentric circles of our ability to create value-add connections for our founders. At the inner circle are the 100 plus active job sites at any given time at Suffolk Construction. The average project size over 100 million. And with that test bed, so to speak, we provide direct feedback to founders on the product, user interface, sometimes the pricing model and the business model as well. In the second concentric circle, we have business partners like subcontractors that are working directly with Suffolk on the job sites. And there we act as a technology distributor. We're able to recommend specific solutions that are targeting these subcontractors by segmenting the right kind of subcontractors to bring to our founders as potential customers. Because there really isn't a mature technology channel reseller ecosystem in construction tech yet. If anyone's doing something like that, we'd love to know. We don't want to be the only one doing this. Our founders can really benefit from go-to-market assistance in the ways that we're providing, others can provide. And then in the outer circle, we've got a broader set of industry partners, insurance companies, material suppliers, equipment providers, for example, that we can work with to partner up with our founders and make specific introductions. And so to give you kind of maybe one or two examples, I'll use the Boost program again, which is our accelerator program. In about a 6 to 8 week period, we're now on our 4th cohort, which was just announced yesterday at Groundbreak. We're able to kind of form specific SWAT teams during a 6-week period around these founders. And for example, we put a robotics company through the program called Canvas Robotics. They do automated drywall finishing. And with that company during the program, before their robots were even ready to be deployed at scale, what we were able to do is take the data set, historical project schedules that are already compiled together at Suffolk Construction, and run almost a simulation of the robot on that data set to see, did the robot actually accelerate schedule, right? I mentioned cost, schedule, risk mitigation, etc. And if there was a critical path to the completion of drywall on certain schedules, we proved that the robot was, in fact, with the assumptions that we put in, able to save days off the schedule on the back end. So those are some things we can do creatively using data as a way to partner. We have another company called Kojo, which sells procurement software to the MEP trades. And so we're able to find specific subcontractors within the Suffolk network that we opted in to an innovation introduction program. And then give customer leads, warm customer leads directly to that company. And so one of their largest customers came from there. We're able to give them dozens of customers at a time to accelerate their go-to-market.
So maybe go next. I mean, one of the things we were talking about earlier was just this idea of like budget. And it's like if these products are saving costs or increasing value over time, like how are you navigating and how are you seeing startups kind of bridge that pilot?
Yeah, one of the conversations our team's been having is which teams had it right, but it's actually taken them a long time to be like the obvious answer. So I think I have 3 examples of that. One is Cove Tool, which is a building simulation software platform. So all the way from building origination, trying to offer the simulation tools needed to say, okay, if I use this material, if I do this amount of embodied carbon, if I face the windows this direction, like what are the ways I can actually design emissions reduction and decarbonization in the beginning of the project. They're at the point now where they're in, I think, 600 firms in the US, they're moving into Europe, there's like widespread adoption across the industry, and they're actually starting to do even managed services for those companies. Instead of just providing the software tool people want them on, it's now this like obvious solution. It took them a while to realize that, right? That it's just not the tools.
And what was that unlock? Because I think just knowing that there's so many startups in the audience in particular,
Right.
What was the thing that took them from non-obvious to obvious?
I think we have to talk to the founders directly and to get the detail. I think what I saw from my vantage point in watching the reports go through for quarter over quarter is moving from like the user stakeholder to the business outcome stakeholder, which is like a simplification of it. But like, who's logging into my product? What results does that drive? And then what is that person who cares about the results getting from it? And usually what's happening is you're like 10xing purchasing power in that scale up, right? Where you get a certain amount of SaaS tool service, right? And to link that example, so Toggle Robotics is one of our companies. They're a rebar robotics company. They had on small job sites, they had different amounts of test bed, pilot, whatever. Now they're on the Neon project in Saudi Arabia, and like it's a huge scale opportunity. But they kind of had to show how proven they were to be able to unlock that contract, right? So it's getting this 100% on small projects to be able to fulfill the really large ones. And I think the last example I'll give is Kelvin, who's here today, Radiator Labs, what they're formerly known as, being able to do emission reductions in buildings in just New York and sort of prove it over the last 7 years in every stage. I think their big unlock was actually getting the credit capital available to have inventory where they can actually deliver on the opportunities, right? So being able to secure the contracts, have the business and sales locked in, and then actually be able to deliver. That's with hardware companies who I work really closely with often. It's actually the thing that makes it possible to really become a real solution.
And I love the point that you're making around who's the buyer, right? Is it the innovation team with potentially like a smaller budget? Is it a P&L and a budget owner? And if it is the innovation team, like what are the kinds of questions sort of can ask up front, or what are the things that you as an organization can do to better combine those teams? Because I think we've also seen time and time again, if it's purchased by an innovation team that sits outside of the business or isn't taking pain points from the business, isn't feeding insights back to the business, it can be very challenging. And so you as a startup actually have to take much more of an advisory role or much more of a strategic role with that relationship.
Yeah, I want to jump in and just say that one of the challenges in the industry is that there's a lot of siloed efforts happening. So you'll have, a portfolio company of, let's say, Camber Creeks deploying into a certain landlord. You'll have a bunch of our companies deploying into other landlords. And there's a lot of learnings that are being had that are not being shared with the rest of the industry. And so we had realized this. We had seen our portfolio companies go through the whole journey of like demo, which turns into a pilot, which then meets certain KPIs, and then goes to a kind of wider rollout. Some of them get to the holy grail of the portfolio-wide deployment, which is what everybody wants, right? And so what we started to do, we have a research team internally. What we started to do is document those successful deployments, and those that hadn't worked out as well, into case studies that we could then share with other landlords and other startups out there, because really that's going to be good for all of us if we can just start helping the landlords understand what the processes are to get from that initial product demo to like the portfolio-wide deployment. Okay, so I just think there's a lot to be said about more that all of us could be doing with our LPs, who I assume many of them are large developers around the world that are looking to deploy these technologies. Just helping them understand the journey of taking it from cradle to grave.
But what you're talking about is also a paradigmatic shift in the way that real estate is operated and managed. What I mean by that is my partners and I all come from the real estate world, where we like to call ourselves reformed real estate developers. I don't know what just happened with the voice effect there, by the way, that was awesome. Before real estate technology became a thing, the way you made money in real estate was trading on idiosyncratic or asymmetric information. Because if I knew something that you didn't about a certain spot, I'm going to be able to leverage that and make more money. Now we're talking about entering an era of transparency for the betterment of the entire industry, which is something that we need because of the decarbonization efforts. And that's just one vertical that we're talking about. But that takes time. And it's funny because when we started raising outside capital a decade ago or so, whatever it was, and we would talk to the strategic LPs, the financial LPs, they got it, the institutions, the endowment funds, the pension funds, etc. They understood it. But some of the strategics said, well, wait a second, why would I want to use something that one of my competitors was going to use? It took quite a few years for people to realize exactly what you're saying, which is this is going to be for the betterment of the entire industry. But again, quite a paradigm shift. And we're still not there, where there's still a ways to go.
And there's a network effect in what you guys have just described, right? There's a many-to-many relationship between a real estate owner and GCs to subcontractors. So while the activation energy can be pretty high to get a solution adopted, once the solution is adopted, it can propagate because of the many-to-many network effect relationship there. And so I think it's a friction point, but it's also an opportunity for the growth of technology.
Yeah. And I love that example too, because it's like, rather than like there's one race that everyone is trying to win, there's actually like a rising tides kind of metaphor, right? Where it's like you can save costs and be incredibly effective, you can increase valuations for your existing properties in really unique ways.
And part of that too, I just want to add one more thing, which is we tried to go through our portfolio a couple of years ago and tried to see if there are predictors of success in the business models of the companies. And we found some correlation in terms of how many stakeholders a solution can incorporate and offer a value proposition to. The more stakeholders, the stickier it is. I mean, this makes common sense because of the fragmentation of the stakeholders and fragmentation within each stakeholder category that we have to deal with in our industry, right? So OpenSpace was our first investment. And OpenSpace, which is a 3D documentation, photo documentation, progress tracking solution for construction job sites, has a value prop to the owner, information transparency to the general contractor and the CM, but also to the banks, because based on quantified progress, you can release payments. So if you can cross-subsidize that ROI by incorporating multiple stakeholders, you expand the surface area to capture their ROI and make the solutions stickier and more valuable.
I have a hot tip for founders. Get